In this section of the lecture, I'll say something about how the course is going to run, in particular the learning resources and assessment and the objectives I have in the course. I'll start out by saying something about the learning resources. The main learning resource is the lectures. So each week there'll be 1 or 2 lectures, and each of the lectures is divided into 6 or 7 sections so that you can work through the lectures at your own pace. The subject guide provides a detailed outline of the material we'll be covering in each of the lectures, and as well, at the end of this first lecture, I'll be giving an overview of what each of the lectures will be covering. For about 3 or 4 sections in each lecture, there's an optional extra activity to go with that section of the lecture. These will consist of revision questions that will allow you to check and develop your knowledge of the material we've covered in that section. For some of the sections, it's links to readings, in particular from the VoxEU site and The Economist, and some associated questions about the reading that again are intended to let you develop your knowledge of the material we've covered in that section. And for a few of the sections we have links to videos, mainly either online or in a couple of cases interviews that I've done with economic historians, usually talking about issues that relate to the material that we've covered. Some of the material in the optional extra activities will form the basis for the discussion forum, and of course on the discussion forum you're welcome to introduce and raise any issues that you're interested in talking about with your fellow students who are doing this course. I've also put together a glossary. The glossary is an overview of sort of key economics related terminology that we'll use throughout the course. If there's any terms or concepts that aren't there that you'd like to have added, then please let us know about that, and we'll add that to the glossary. It's a good point to mention that this is an introductory level course, so there's no expectation that you begin with any knowledge of the historical material we'll be dealing with or the economic concepts. We try and introduce those as we go along. I've also got for the course as a whole and for each lecture some suggested readings that I think are good for developing in a little bit more detail the material that I will have covered in each lecture. Now, because of copyright, we can't sort of provide direct access to those materials for you, but if you are able to get access to the readings which I've listed there, then they provide a good way of going into some more depth about topics that you might have heard about in the lectures that you're interested in finding more about. As with any course, the more actively you participate in this course, the more I think you'll get out of it. In particular, the more you can do, involve yourself in the activities, in doing active learning. We know that's the way that we make knowledge our own, that we develop our own ways of understanding, organising, thinking about material. So the more actively you're involved, the more it'll happen that you really develop a deep and an integral knowledge of the history of economic development. The highest level of participation that you can have, of course, is to end up with a certificate of completion. To do that, you need to be working through all the lectures, doing at least some of the optional extra activities, participating in the discussion forum a bit if you find that valuable, and of course doing the assessment activities. So there's 3 assessment tasks in this course. As we get to the time when each of those is going to be done, I'll provide a lot more details about them, but I can just say now that the first is an exercise that involves a skill called argument mapping. The second assessment task is one that will get you to think about the economic development experience of your country. And the third task will try to bring together all the material we've covered in the course and to have you reflect on what it means altogether for thinking about the causes of economic development in poor, rich countries around the world today. To complete the course, to get the certificate of completion, you'll need to do each of the 3 assessment tasks. As well, for each assessment task, I'll be asking you to do peer reviews or reviews of 3 assessments done by your peers in the subject. So for assessment task 1, you'll do the task, then you'll do 3 reviews of that assessment that have been done by your fellow students. And the peer review will involve you giving some qualitative or written feedback, but also giving a grade. And the grading scheme will be that that what you need to get the certificate of completion is that you need to get a rating of satisfactory or above from 2 of the 3 of your peer reviewers on each of the 3 assessment tasks that you do. So to get the certificate, each of your reviewers on each of the tasks will give you a rating, and what you need is for 2 out of 3 of your reviewers on each of the assessments to have given you a rating of satisfactory. There are other ways of being involved in the subject. If you don't want the extent of involvement of doing the assessment, then you can obviously still be following along with the lectures and still doing some of the optional extra activities if you think those are valuable, and also participating in the discussion forum. And I've also designed the subject so that if you're more interested in dipping into particular topics, that really all of the lectures and most of the sections are really designed as discrete or standalone units. So there's also the capacity to sort of dip into those sections that cover material that you're particularly interested in learning about. I've designed the course, the content, the extra activities, the assessments to be built around sort of what I think are the learning objectives in an economic history course. Those learning objectives are fourfold. First of all, to develop a stock of knowledge about what happened in history and why, in particular in this course in the history of economic development, and to understand something about the causal forces that drove the path of economic development that we've followed. Secondly, to acquire some ability to develop your own knowledge about what happened, so to think yourself about sort of what happened in the history of economic development and to try and understand that in terms of sort of the causal forces that drove the development. Thirdly, to have the capacity to use your knowledge of history to think about the present and future of economic development. For example, to think about what lessons history of economic development might teach us for guiding policy making to try and assist economic development in poor countries today and in the future. And finally, sort of putting all those bits together to develop an appreciation of the value of taking a historical perspective to understanding about economic activity and economic development. For example, with the 3 assessment exercises, the first assessment exercise is really about a skill that you can use to summarise some of the knowledge we have about economic development. So that's point 1. The second assessment task, which will get you to reflect on the economic development of experience of your own country, is about starting to acquire that second skill of having the ability to develop your own knowledge about what happened and why. And the third assessment task, which is going to ask you to bring everything that we've covered in the course together to think about the implications of the history of economic development for the future economic development. That really relates to the third point of developing the capacity to use a knowledge of history to think about the present and future. And the extra optional exercises are constructed in a similar way to, in some cases, sort of add to your stock of knowledge about what happened, in some cases to try and get you to think sort of constructively about what happened and why, and in other cases to sort of think about that applying to the future. So the objective is that at the end of the course, you'll have started on the path to developing sort of these skills, which I think are the really critical skills associated with doing a course in economic history. In the next section of this lecture, I'll move on to talk about why I think the study of economic history, in particular the history of economic development, is so valuable and important.